The savanna awoke slowly beneath the hush of dawn, its golden grass shimmering like liquid sunlight as the horizon softened from indigo to pale amber. A gentle wind moved across the plains, carrying with it the scents of acacia bark, dry earth, and distant herds that had wandered through the night. The land was calm, almost reverent, as if waiting for something. In the heart of this great expanse lay the great sun pride, nestled between weathered stones and warm earth, still stirring from sleep. And among them slept a lion, whose destiny had been whispered long before his first breath. His name was Marandu. Born on the night when thunder clashed against a rare storm, Marandu's arrival was seen as an omen. Elders spoke of it quietly. Storms did not come without meaning, and the echoes of that thunder felt less like noise and more like a prophecy stamping itself onto the world. His mother Shira would often tell him this story as he grew, reminding him not that he was chosen, but that he was capable. Storms come to lions who can survive them, she would say, brushing her muzzle gently through his cub mane. As a cub, Marandu was noticeably different. While his siblings raced through the grass and chased butterflies with reckless delight, he was always watching, always learning, always listening. He studied his father, King Arumo, with wide, thoughtful eyes. Arumo's steps were slow now, his once majestic mane streaked with gray, but the strength of his presence never faded. When he stood, the plains respected him. When he roared, even the wind carried his voice with pride. Marandu admired him deeply, yet he feared disappointing him even more. One morning, when Marandu was no more than a few months old, he wandered too far from the pride during play. The sun was soft, the grass warm, and curiosity tugged him forward. Soon, he stumbled upon a small antelope calf trapped between thorny branches. It was trembling, blood marking its leg where the thorns had scratched it. Marandu felt fear first, not of the calf, but of making a wrong choice. His father always emphasized that lions must be strong, but something inside him tugged louder. The calf was scared. It shouldn't suffer. Without fully understanding why, Marandu nudged the branches aside and freed the little creature. It limped away quickly, disappearing into the grass. He didn't know his father had been watching. When Marandu returned, Arumo called his name, and Marandu approached with his ears low, unsure whether he had done right or wrong. "Why did you help it?" Arumo asked, his deep voice unreadable. Marandu swallowed. It was scared, and it didn't need to die. Arumo stared at him for a long moment, then let out a slow breath. "Your heart is strong," he said at last, "but strength must be guided. Compassion can be a gift. It can also blind you. One day you will have to choose which it becomes." Marandu didn't fully understand, but he remembered those words, carried them through every season that followed. The savanna raised him with lessons written not in books, but in wind, drought, and survival. He learned to listen for danger in the rustle of distant grass. He learned to read the sky for storms long before clouds showed themselves. And he learned that leadership was not just roaring the loudest, it was stepping forward when others could not. As years passed, Arumo grew frailer. He no longer walked as far. His voice grew softer. Marandu hunted more, patrolled more, helped the lionesses watch the cubs, and gradually the pride began to look to him instead of the aging king. But with responsibility came shadow, and the shadow was shaped like a lion named Baraji. Baraji was a rogue, massive, scarred, hardened by a lifetime of exile and bitterness. He had once tried to overthrow his own father and had been cast out for it. Since then, he collected followers, lions who believed the world owed them more, lions who saw mercy as a defect. Baragi conquered small prides one by one, spreading fear like wildfire, and eventually, inevitably, his eyes fixed on the great sun pride's territory. One twilight, when the sky dripped with the last fires of sunset, Baragi arrived at the border. He didn't sneak. He didn't stalk. He roared, a roar meant to dominate, to announce, to challenge everything the great sun pride stood upon. The earth trembled beneath the force of it. Birds took flight in chaos. The herd scattered. Arumo tried to rise, but his legs buckled. Marandu stepped forward, positioning himself between his father and the rogue lion. "No," Marandu said softly. "This is my fight." Arumo looked at him with something deeper than pride, something like acceptance. "Then," he whispered, "remember," he whispered, "a king's heart must be fierce, but never uncontrolled." Marandu walked toward Baragi calmly. Baragi towered, muscles rippling beneath his scarred hide. His mane was wild, his eyes sharp with malice and hunger for dominance. "Your lands are rich," Baragi growled. "Your pride is healthy. I will take it." Marandu stood firm. "You will not." Baragi laughed, a cold, jagged sound. "You're young. You know nothing of the cost of survival. Survival without purpose is not living," Marandu replied. "You have forgotten that." Baragi lunged, not with the fury of a lion seeking food, but the fury of one seeking to erase anything that reminded him of what he had lost. The battle that followed was fierce but not brutal, more like a clash of destinies than a contest of violence. Baragi was strong, striking with force meant to crush, but Marandu was swift. He stepped aside at the last second. He used Baragi's momentum against him. He moved like water, like wind, like every lesson the Savanna had whispered to him since birth. Each time he fell, he rose with stronger resolve. Each time Baragi struck, Marandu learned. Marandu wasn't fighting to dominate, he was fighting to protect. That made him unstoppable. Finally, he pinned Baragi beneath him, not with cruelty, but with undeniable control. Baragi looked up in disbelief. "End it," he snarled. "That's what kings do." Marandu shook his head. "No, that is what you do." Baragi froze. No one had ever spared him before. No one had ever denied him violence. Marandu stepped back and allowed him to rise. "Leave these lands," Marandu said. "I will not chase you beyond this border, but do not return." Baragi stared at him, not with hatred, but with confusion, maybe even wonder. He turned and disappeared into the tall grass. Marandu limped back to his pride. They surrounded him, not cheering, not roaring, but touching him gently with their heads and shoulders. It wasn't celebration, it was gratitude. Arumo watched proudly but tiredly. His son had become everything he had hoped for. Days later, Arumo passed peacefully, surrounded by warmth, love, and the pride he had protected his whole life. Marandu nuzzled his father's mane one last time, inhaling the familiar scent of dust, sun, and memory, and then he rose as king. Under Marandu's leadership, the great sun pride flourished. He was wise, patient, observant, compassionate, but never naive. He ruled fairly, always considering the needs of the pride before his own. Seasons passed, rains came and went, cubs were born, young lions grew, old ones rested beneath the shade of acacia trees. Marandu walked the plains each morning, greeting the day with calm purpose. He learned the land's secrets, the soft trails elephants carved, the way zebras moved before storms, how hyenas laughed differently depending on whether they were celebrating or warning others. His reign became known across the plains. Some lions traveled far just to see him from a distance. Marandu did not care for fame, but he cared deeply for the balance of life around him. And though he didn't like to admit it, he often wondered what had become of Baragi. Years later, fate led him to that answer. One afternoon, when the sun was high and the air shimmered with heat, Marandu found a lion resting near a watering hole. A lion old and thin, his mane faded, his scars softened by age. It was Baragi. The once fearsome rogue lifted his head with effort. His eyes were tired but no longer burning with rage. When he saw Marandu approach, Baragi lowered his head respectfully. "I fought the world," he said weakly, "and the world won." Marandu lay beside him. "You fought yourself," he said softly. "The world wasn't your enemy." Baragi gave a small, sad smile. "I didn't understand your mercy before." "Do you now?" Baragi nodded faintly. "Mercy is harder than war." Marandu looked at him with eyes full of compassion. "But it saves more than it destroys." They sat together, two old lions who had met once as enemies, but now as something closer to reflections of what life could have made them. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, painting the plains gold, Baragi took his final breath with peaceful acceptance. Marandu closed the rogue's eyes gently. No hatred, no victory, just closure, just understanding. Marandu remained by Baragi's side long after the rogue lion's breath had faded into the warm twilight air. The watering hole rippled softly as a breeze brushed its surface, carrying the faint scent of cool water and wet earth. Fireflies began to flicker around them, tiny sparks drifting like wandering stars. There was no hatred in Marandu's heart, only a quiet ache for what Baragi could have been, had life been kinder, had pride not twisted into bitterness. Even though Baragi had once come to take everything from Marandu, the king felt no triumph, only understanding, only the weight of another lion's story, ending beneath the same sun that rose over them both. As the sky darkened, Marandu rose slowly. His joints were not as smooth as they once were. Age had begun to whisper to him, gently but insistently. Still, his step was steady as he returned to his pride, guided by the gentle glow of the moon. When he reached them, the lionesses looked up from where the cubs lay sleeping. Their eyes asked silent questions, and Marandu answered with only a small nod. They understood. Life was not about defeating enemies. It was about learning from them, growing from them, and honoring the fragile balance that held the savanna together. Seasons changed, painting the plains in shifting hues. The rains came early one year, drenching the earth until the grass glittered like fields of emerald. Herds thrived. Birds returned in great flocks. The pride grew strong and numerous under Marandu's rule. There were mornings when the cubs woke him by tugging playfully at his tail or climbing over his back. He would pretend to ignore them until they pounced all at once, and then he'd swat his paw gently in their direction as they tumbled away in giggles and squeals. The lionesses would watch, their hearts warm, grateful for a king who played just as easily as he commanded. He was a protector, but he never forgot to be a father, an uncle, a friend. One day, during the warm stretch of the dry season, a drought began creeping across the land. Water holes shrank, grass turned brittle and yellow. Herds traveled farther and farther in search of safety. The pride felt the strain. Marandu saw the tiredness in the lionesses' eyes as they hunted longer for smaller prey. He saw the cubs growing thinner as food became scarce. And so, one hot afternoon, Marandu gathered the pride at the edge of their territory. The sun beat heavily upon them, the sky a blazing white. He spoke calmly. "We must move east for a time. The rains have not reached here, but the riverlands still hold water. We will return when the plains breathe again." The pride trusted him completely. They began their journey just as the sun dipped low, turning the world gold. Marandu walked at the front, guiding them through dry brush, past cracked riverbeds and across rolling fields where the wind carried dust more than scent. Some nights the stars were their only companions, glittering above them like a map older than lions themselves. After several days, they reached the riverlands, lush, green, and alive even during the drought. The sound of flowing water soothed their weary spirits. The cubs jumped into the shallow edges of the river, splashing playfully. The lionesses rested beneath the shade of fig trees. Marandu drank deeply, grateful they had arrived safely. During their stay, they shared the river with other animals: zebras, wildebeests, giraffes, even baboons who chattered loudly at dusk. Marandu watched them all peacefully, ensuring no danger threatened the pride. The riverlands became a temporary home filled with calm and abundance. But as all seasons do, the drought eventually passed. Dark clouds rolled back across the sky, heavy with promise. Rain fell in sheets over the savanna, restoring life to the plains. Grass rose tall again, water holes widened, the land exhaled relief, and so the pride returned home. Their territory welcomed them like an old friend. Trees stood taller than before. The wind carried sense of renewal, and Marandu felt pride swell within him, not in the land, but in the unity of his family, in the quiet strength that had carried them through hardship. Years passed gently. Marandu's mane grew thicker but softer, streaked with silver. His strides slowed, his mornings became quieter, but his spirit burned just as brightly as ever. He had lived a life carved from storms, challenges, compassion, and wisdom. And the savanna had shaped him into a king that stories would remember long after his paw prints faded. One cool morning, as dawn began to break, Marandu climbed a small hill overlooking the pride's territory. It was the same hill where he had once stood with his father as a cub, listening to Arumo speak of leadership, strength, and balance. Now Marandu stood alone, watching the sun stretch its rays across the vast horizon. The light warmed his face, and he closed his eyes, breathing in the crisp scent of morning. Behind him, the pride stirred awake. The lionesses groomed their cubs, the young lions yawned, and the adolescents chased insects through the brushing grass. Life thrived around him, full of movement and laughter. A young lion approached him. Chelani, the Marandu, had begun quietly training to one day lead. Chelani was strong, thoughtful, gentle, and brave. He reminded Marandu of himself, but with a spark uniquely his own. "Are you well?" Chelani asked softly. Marandu smiled. "I am. I'm simply remembering." Chelani sat beside him, gazing at the sunrise. "You've given this pride everything." Marandu shook his head gently. "I gave what the land gave me. My father taught me that kings don't own their pride, they serve them, and they serve the Savanna. He turned his tired eyes toward Jelani. Your time will come. Lead with strength, but lead with love too. Shalani lowered his head respectfully. I will. The day went on peacefully. Marandu spent much of it resting beneath an acacia tree while cubs played around him. A little lioness cub climbed onto his back, settling herself proudly like she had conquered a mountain. Marandu let her, rumbling a soft purr. Another cub tugged at his ear, and he pretended not to notice until they giggled uncontrollably. That night, the stars glowed brighter than they had in many moons. The sky felt close, as if bending low to listen. Marandu walked slowly to the same hilltop, his joints aching but his heart light. The air was cool, filled with the songs of crickets and distant night birds. The moon cast a gentle glow over the plains, painting everything in silver. He lay down in the soft grass and looked out over the land he had protected for so many years. Memories drifted around him. Shira's gentle voice, Arumo's deep rumble, the games of his cubhood, the warmth of the pride sleeping beside him in countless sunsets, his battle of wills with Baragai, the laughter of cubs, the wise eyes of lionesses, the echoes of storms and rains and sunlight. He was not sad. He was full of life lived, love given, legacy built. The wind moved across the hilltop, brushing his mane like a soft farewell. Marandu closed his eyes as the world quieted around him. The sounds of the night faded. The weight of time lifted, and with a peaceful sigh, Marandu drifted into the gentlest sleep he had ever known. When morning came, the pride found him resting atop the hill, his expression calm, noble, serene. The sun cast golden light across him as if honoring a king one last time. No one cried out. Instead, they gathered around him in silence, touching him gently, pressing their heads to his mane. Love radiated from every lion present. Jelani stood at Marandu's side the longest, his eyes warm with grief and gratitude. Thank you, he whispered, for everything. The pride lifted their heads together as the sun rose and released a soft, unified call, not a roar of mourning, but a song of memory, respect, and promise. The Savanna carried their voices across the plains. From that day forward, Marandu's legacy lived in every sunrise, every paw print of the pride he shaped, every cub that grew strong, every life that thrived under the balanced rule he had taught. And sometimes, on quiet nights, when the wind swept across the grass with gentle purpose, the lions would pause and listen. Some swore they could hear a distant, deep rumble, faint but unmistakable. Marandu's spirit roaming the plains he loved, watching still, guiding still, living forever in the heart of the Savanna.